because I'm actually just going to summarize what the students have done. I mean, I don't actually do anything. I mean, I'm above the age limit to dig roots. Hate that. But I'm very proud of the students that we have and what they've presented, and I'm going to summarize here the learnings. You know, allegedly we learned a few things that we're going to use to lead into our grower panel. And you guys, anybody that knows me, knows I like to ask questions, right, to try and engage you. And so I've asked you this one before, but it's relevant to my presentation today. It's the 3 P's of productivity. And these are 3 key things that start with P that all interact to impact your productivity. Now, I know one of them, products. I mean, we talked about some products today, individual herbicide products. We've talked about some biological products. So, I mean, our sponsors would be happy to talk to you about their products. So, you got to have you have to have the right product, and then you also have to have the right practice. And if you think about it, all of the students have talked about practices. Now here's the key, is trying to determine how these things interact. You know, every product doesn't work with that practice. And which practice and which product, that's a huge focus of our research. Now here's the question. What's the 3rd P? And there's a lot of possibilities. Remember, it's products and practices that are interacting. What's the 3rd thing that's important? All right, I've heard a lot of ones. So I'll tell you what I typically hear. Somebody typically says, well, it's the price. I mean, probably the price of those products, pretty important. By the way, productivity doesn't care about price. I know you care about price, but productivity doesn't. So, well, what about profit? We all care about that. That's why you're here. I mean, in our research, we know this is an important part, but we largely ignore it because we're so busy focusing on the products and practices. Obviously, profit is important. So here's another one I've heard. Is it practical? I mean, here's a sad fact. Not every practice is practical on every operation. So, and then somebody, these are ones that people gave me, by the way. A red one is the incorrect answer, but it's still reasonable. Somebody said to me, well, what about performance? I said, geez, that's pretty good. You know, that would be how these two go together. I asked my grandkids who are visiting me this week, and they said, well, what about poop? I mean, that starts with P. And I'm like, yeah, that probably plays a pretty big role. And if you think about it, think about all the cool things that start with P. Photosynthesis, phloem, right? Photon, pre-emergence, president, priest. A lot of things start with P, but the real 3rd P of productivity is physiology. Boy, you didn't see that coming, didn't you? That's a pretty confusing term, but it starts with P. That's what hopefully we've been bringing you today. You know, the why, the physiology behind the products and practices that you're going to use to impact your productivity. Now I hope you learned some stuff, and I'm going to summarize the 6 things that we hopefully taught you from the students' presentations. So I learned, actually I already had a high suspicion of this, but I learned that weeds don't add yield. There's actually some weeds that are worse than others, and they're getting a lot harder to control. I mean, I thought Devin did a fantastic job of pointing that out to us. And oh boy, was I happy to learn that weeds don't add yield, because, you know, I've been calling weed control a prerequisite to my 7 wonders of the corn yield world for the last 15 years, with no actual evidence. You know, I've milked this corn yield, the 7 wonders of the corn yield thing to death. These are the key prerequisites. One of the prerequisites is weeds. And happily, Devin laid that out. Boy, weeds don't add yield. I learned today from him the bread and butter of weed control is synergy. herbicides equal a dead weed. I mean, now I know there's been great debate on whether this weed is actually dead. Next time, use a different picture, Kevin. But we can assure you it's synergy. You know, I mean, I got water hemp on my farm. Holy cow, it's pretty bad. You know, and so obviously he said mix more than one herbicide together. All right, I'm looking at the bill. There's 3 herbicides that they put to control. And I noticed that, you know, one of them's a lot more expensive than the other of the 3. And so I said, hey, Devin, you know, we only need 2. How about I drop this expensive one? Apparently he said that's not how it works. You drop the cheaper one. Synergy is the key. You gotta, weeds decrease yield. So we learned that. You probably already knew that. We also learned that yield is math. And that you have to understand and manage yield components if you're going to increase math. And yield components don't necessarily like each other. Very often they're negatively related. Okay, we learned for soybean, I got a visual depiction of the soybean yield components here. We learned for soybean that yield components is a function of pod number per acre. Notice it's not plants, because the damn thing branches, and you have multiple nodes that can have pods, and more than one pod and a node. So it's pods per acre, seeds per pod, weight per seed. You know how many seeds per pod there usually are. There's usually 3. Of course, if you have bad conditions, there's less. And if you have good conditions, there's more. You know, which one of these is usually has the biggest impact on yield? You were paying attention to Dr. Sybil. Which one is usually the most important? Well, it's pods per acre. And how do you get more pods per acre? More nodes. Pods per acre is node number and pods per node. And Dr. Sybil showed you that if you plant earlier, what do you have? More nodes. If you plant a fuller maturity for the region, what do you get? More nodes. That's an opportunity for more pods. Now, he didn't mention it, but at around 130,000 plants per acre, you can put 1 more pod on every plant. Just 1. That's 2 bushels. 2. Pods is what you need, and to get pods, nodes. You're managing nodes. Dr. Sybil also talked about the yield or algorithm for corn. It's a little different. It's plants, kernels, and weight per kernel. Now, he pointed this out. I mean, here's the one I want to affect the most today. That one. I mean, that's my hope. I'm hoping for good weather for heavy kernel weight. But what one do we usually have the most control over? Plants per acre. Hate to tell you. I mean, you actually have to purchase and plant the seed. But Dr. Sybil showed you that this is the factor that's changed the most in your farming career. I mean, I know you don't have to come to one of our presentations to see this graph, which is the average yield of corn in the U.S. over the last 55 years. That's the orange triangle. Well, not in orange, by the way. You know, it goes up and down depending on that year's weather, but about 2 bushels per acre per year. This year it's going to finally be one of those it's probably going to be more than that. And associated with that is a linear increase in the number of plants planted. Now, when you go back to 1965, average yield of corn in the U.S. is like 70 bushels. Planting, you know, less than 20,000 plants, probably a 36-inch row. And then now, more than 50 years later, the average yield's more than doubled. Most of you are in a 30-inch row. The average planting density in the U.S. just under 32,000. That's the U.S. A lot of you are higher. But guess what? Despite the high seed costs, this is the one that has to go up. That's why a lot of our work focused on this. How are we going to manage a higher population of plants? Now, there's a caveat that Sam showed you that comes from increasing the number of plants. That is root architecture. I mean, I love below ground stuff, like taking the pants and pulling the pants of the plant down, looking at its root. And we saw that there's huge variation among hybrids, shocking variation. And then we saw that the size of the root changes with some key management. Okay, that's what Sam Wisconsin showed you. Look at how happy he is digging those roots. I think he showed you this is our student's favorite task. And I think we have a few thousand left to dig if anybody wants to get involved with that good time. I mean, Todd, look at the smile on Sam's face, and look at how happy Dr. Sybil is here watching those roots. I'm going to remind you that as you increase the density of plants, you decrease the size of each plant root system. I know Sam showed you this, and we've seen this time and time again. And this is a different picture than what Sam showed, just for verification. So I got the photographic evidence. We've weighed the roots. By the way, this is before the Sam rating. So we weighed the roots, put the weights in grams, that metric unit, make this look more scientific. And what we clearly see, what Sam already mentioned, is you raise the population 1,000 plants per acre, you're giving up 2.5% of the roots. 2.5% less roots per plant with every 1,000 plant increase in population. This is never going to change. We're never going to go backwards. By the way, you pay for roots and yield. This means we have to think about managing the crop differently. Or it means the crop might be under more stress. All right, we have a theory here in the Crop Biz Lab. And our theory is that mineral nutrients and water enter the plant through the root. Pretty sure we can prove that. I'm pretty sure that's going to be an issue moving forward. You're going to have to do something to manage the plants better. Now, one thing we talked about a little bit was some of the previous growers alluded to it. And any of you know me know I love this. And that's narrow rows. And I could go off on the virtue of narrow rows. 30-inch rows versus 20. By the way, 15 is also narrow rows compared to 30. We just don't research it with our equipment. But one thing I will tell you is that narrow rows work everywhere. I learned they only work north of I-90. That's wrong. They work everywhere because guess what happens to the size of the root system in a narrow row? It gets bigger. So again, I got some outrageous densities here. 30-inch row. Some outrageous densities in a 20-inch row. Got the picture of the roots. We weigh these roots. This allows us, with the weight, to play the diagonal game. Where I compare the weight of the root system, 38,000 in a 30-inch row, is the same thing as 44 to 20. Look at that. 44,000 in a 30 is the same as 50 in a 20. See the diagonal? There's a perfect diagonal that a 20-inch row gives you back the root system that you would have had for 6,000 fewer plants. This is one way to manage a higher population of plants, which we're going to have to do. We also learned, when it came to roots, is there a shocking hybrid variation associated with them. And Sam showed us that this is an opportunity to clue in how to manage the hybrid. Boy, if I knew what the SAM rating was, I'd have a pretty good indication whether that hybrid would respond to in-season applications of fertilizer. Now, not only do hybrids differ in their roots, but they also differ in their dating potential. And we learned that there's a huge variation among hybrids in their response to management. Way greater than you would think about. I don't know why that surprises me when they differ in their rooting size. Miranda did a very excellent job talking about our hybrid management report, where we show you individual hybrids and how they respond to management. This is never a way to try to look at all hybrids, but it's a way to show you that certain hybrids require different management. This is the biggest factor, the most important decision that you make every year. What hybrid you select. And Miranda kind of demonstrated this a little bit in her research, and I've seen this every time. Every time we grow a bunch of hybrids, 20 hybrids here, this is, at our 3 sites, all managed, right? So we allegedly get the hybrid performance. And when we look at the difference between the highest yielding and the lowest yielding, on average, we see a 50 bushel swing, sometimes greater. Okay, what are we talking about? You know, I ranked the 20 hybrids there. That's the swing I'm talking about. 49 bushels. By the way, these are all frontline commercial hybrids. You know, if that was the one that I bought, I'm not as happy if that was the one that I bought. Boy, that makes a huge difference. Hybrid selection, huge difference in your inherent yield, and as we showed you, on how you need to take that hybrid. So I know I get this question all the time. How do I know, from this list, which one is the best hybrid? Well, Miranda already showed you one of them. It's usually the fullest relative maturity for the region. That's especially true if you plant early. I think it has something to do with using the full season. Just a wild catch. All right, that's number one. The other one is it's also usually the newest and most expensive hybrid. Guys, I hate to tell you, but do you honestly think the seed company would release a new hybrid if it didn't have the potential to yield 5 bushels better than the one it replaced? And you think they wouldn't price it accordingly? Do you think you don't get what you pay for? So it's usually fullest relative, the newest fullest relative, most expensive relative maturity for the region. Now we've been doing this for the last 10 years, right? And I can tell you that a hybrid that's on this side now, 3 or 4 years, if I keep looking at it, it's going to be over here. That's how fast they change. All right? Because density has to go up, and because that results in a smaller root system, and because hybrids differ in their root system, 2 of our presentations showed you that there is lots of opportunities to improve yield with better fertilizer placement. Now I know fertilizer placement is a real pain in the butt. I mean, I know it's a lot easier to broadcast it in the fall. And I've heard a bunch of times, we can't do this. It takes too much time. That's never our concern. You want us to look at what is possible. And if that possibility is big enough or important enough, if the government tells us enough, we got to reduce nutrient loss, this is the way to do it. Fertilizer placement. Why are we so bent on fertilizer placement? Any ideas? It has to do with the horizontal spread of the corn plant's root system, which, by the way, is only 6 to 8 inches. Jen already told us that roots don't like to touch. I mean, they don't like each other, right? You ever dig up a root system? They don't grow into each other. They grow into the area between the rows. But here's a huge myth that I want to dispel. Roots don't cross the row. I mean, maybe a few fine ones. But the very great bulk of the root system sits in 6 to 8 inches. I can prove it, see, because that's an expensive scientific instrument called a rulerometer. I mean, I have one here. And we actually quantify that spread. And it's 6 to 7 inches. And this is at 32,000. As you increase the density, guess what? That spread gets less. Okay? Not a doubt in my mind about it. Fertilizer placement is in your future. It should be in your future because of this. So the good news is there's a lot of opportunities for fertilizer placement. All right, we didn't get a chance to talk about all of these today, but I mean, starter is one way. Putting it in furrow, you're using a starter system, and you can put something else in furrow if you do that. And Miranda didn't get a chance to tell you, but our current corn MIP is not only looking at double fungicide versus single, but it's also looking at starter. That starter allow us to set a higher yield potential, manage a higher population of plants. So Jared talked about our banding application. I can't remember what year this is, but I know we wore out those the Dawn row units. We've abandoned fertilizer now in the last 15 years. There's Jared in the cab to prove it, that he's done an awful lot of banded fertilizer. And I can show you hundreds of pictures that look like this from the banded fertility. So it's not that we didn't put the fertilizer there, we broadcast it. Same range, same hybrid, same planting density, all this, you know, so there's nothing biased there. There's broadcast, there's expanded. See any difference? You see this virtually every time, regardless of the soil type. Usually 15 bushels better if we band it. And that is why so many of our trials are interested in placement. Now I know that Jared's done a lot of banding here. You know, and then later on he gets to do the harvesting. He's pretty happy when you know, when we have a higher yield and he's in the combine. But so Jared's a placement guy. When the combine breaks down and I got to place him in there, then he's not as happy when it comes to banding fertilizer. He showed you our past work has been this way. We compared broadcast and Coulter application. We see that huge potential increase in yield. Now I'm happy to say we're able to look at other ways with the shed. In addition to when we need to make this treatment. I'm convinced if you're a strip tiller, you're going to be doing this. Now, you know, let's say, well, we'd rather place our fertilizer in season. Well, we showed you there's some opportunity there. We got the wide drop. We got the dry drop. I'm happy to say we sort of invented the dry drop here. Somebody figured out, why don't we just pour the granule down the row and see what that does. And that's been extremely effective at moving that fertilizer into the soil. This is PK. PK are allegedly immobile. Alright? But not if you concentrate them in a band. They're shockingly mobile. Gabriella showed us that with phosphorus. I mean, there's the untreated control. Now here's the good news. If I broadcast phosphorus fertilizer on the soil surface, I do get some of it 2 inches into the soil profile. Boy, I hardly get any of it 4 inches deep and 6 inches deep. But when I concentrate it in season, with either the dry drop or the wide drop, not only is there a huge increase in the amount of nutrients available, but I move more of it into the soil profile. Hopefully it coincides with that period of maximum uptake. And then finally, we also learned that we're going to have a lot more crop residue to deal with. I mean, then we're going to have to manage that residue. I think Dalton showed us that residue comes from a lot of places. It certainly comes from continuous corn. That's the problem with growing continuous corn. It's the residue, you know. I mean, the corn crop doesn't like to live in the dead, decomposing bodies of the previous crop. I mean, I hardly blame it if you think about it. Cover crops, right? I'm not sure why a cover crop isn't the weed control, but I know there's a lot more residue when we have cover crop and now double crop. All of these are more residue. I mean, you know conservation tillage gives more residue. Now here I'd like to pose a question to you. And so I'm calling this stuff residue. I mean, it's really not a very happy term, right? Residue. It's sort of what's left in the sink, right? After I've taken a shower. The scientific name for this stuff is stover. Sounds like a bad cheese, doesn't it? I mean, some people call it litter, you know, it's like the cat box. And then a lot of you, I know it, you call it trash. I mean, but as Dalton showed you, it certainly isn't trash, but there's a lot of potential goodness in that. So I know you're sitting here saying to me, well, you know, I don't do conservation tillage, I don't do continuous farming, I don't do cover crops, and I don't do double crops, so I don't care about your residue. Well, if you got higher yield, you do. For each bushel of additional yield you have, Dalton showed you, 44 pounds more residue. Every yield, every bushel. You cannot stop that. Once we get you that yield, you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to have to help you manage the residue. Now, as Dalton said, a lot of people call residue trash. I try not to call Dalton the trash man. I'd rather call him the treasure man. And as he showed you, you can manage that residue to make it treasure. A lot of nutritional value in that residue. How are you going to manage it? Okay, I'm not going to go into it, but it's basically the same approach we're going to take with our meal here fairly shortly. I mean, when I sit down to eat, I'm going to chop it up. I don't want to practice any Heimlichs today. I'm going to fortify it, and we learned some sulfur and nitrogen really helps. And then I'm going to eat it with a biological, with some variation in it. And that's going to make that residue from trash to treasure. We didn't talk much about it with biological, because this is probably the single largest growing area of biologicals that we believe has a lot of promise. So allegedly 6 things that we taught you here today. We taught you the weeds don't add yield, and some of them are pretty nasty. I mean, I know the most wanted ones, I'm going to pull those Palmer if I see them. It's going to be a hard explanation of my life, though, when I'm late for dinner. Yield is math. You have to understand math, right? If you know yield components, and I know yield components, this is how I can tell if you're lying to me about the yield you claimed or achieved. I just do the math. And it has to work out. I also know that we're going to spend a lot of time looking below ground. I know that's my bias, but there's a lot of important stuff that's happening with roots, the vast unexplored horizon. It's going to help us position hybrids, manage higher densities, determine those other in-season management practices. And a lot of that variation among the hybrids is going to be due, or is due, to their rooting. We're going to have to do a better job of fertilizing, and that's going to largely come down to placement. Not entirely, but that's a huge opportunity to increase yield, and the net result is we're going to have to manage the trash, turn it into a treasure. So, I couldn't be happier to be able to try and teach these lessons to you. I feel compelled as an educator. I got to send you away learning something here to make your time worthwhile. So those are the 6 things that we covered.